Hi, this is Allison Brunelli, Associate Trainer for Art2Ride at the foundation level, submitting part 3 of a 3-part session for a submission called Full Training Session for review. In this particular portion of my mounted session, this is the part 3 mounted session, I am starting with a tad bit more of work in hand. This is immediately following the lunge session. And the reason I'm doing a smidge more of the work in hand is just to remind Contigo that what I want is for him at the walk. Once I get on in the saddle, I want him to think about just staying active, but being willing to elongate his neck, keep his throat latch open, and to let that energy flow like a wave from his back end to his front end, and to just release the tensions and allow himself to walk with me in the saddle like that. And I'm using the work in hand to remind him of it. The reason I'm doing this is because I've only done it once before this particular session, which was the day before this particular session. And the reason I'm doing it is because every other time I've gotten in the saddle, I've dealt with some tension, and I think that tension is just stemming from maybe some anxiety about me getting in the saddle, and him feeling some anxiety about performing. So I am doing a little work in hand to the left. I noticed that once again, he's a little tight in the jaw and the poll. And so I've asked him to do a little stepping over and moving away from me to help soften his, loosen up his back and to soften his poll and his jaw. It's taken a little longer than I want it to for him to actually lower and let go completely. But I can't control these things, and all I can do is support him. And his walk actually looks a lot better in some respects than it did before the lunge work. Here he is starting to lengthen his neck a little bit more. He continues to want to sort of look outside the circle, but I'm just encouraging him to bring his nose in just a little. And at this point here, I'm starting to feel more of a release in his poll and his jaw. And I do very much like how he's got his nose poking more out and not curled in. So this is all looking positive to me. It's not quite as low as I'd like it. However, it does feel good and good enough for me to then get on. So I'm about to get on here in a few minutes, in a minute or two. The main thing is just keeping Contigo active enough and pushing that energy, asking him to push that energy up over his back to lengthen the neck. That's the only thing I'm really thinking about here. Controlling the outside shoulder, asking him to move away from me, keeping him active enough, and then just suppling that jaw and that pull. Without pulling back, and while encouraging him to poke his nose forward. That looks pretty good to me. It could be a little lower, of course, and I'd like to see that, but on this particular day, he doesn't quite offer that. There's a little bit deeper stretch there. That's a nice stretch there. Could be a little bit deeper, like I said, but pretty good. So I get on Contigo, and first thing I felt was exactly what I noticed in work in hand, and that is just this sort of resistance in the pull and the jaw. So there's definitely some tension going on in the pull and the jaw on this particular day that he had a hard time getting rid of, which is fine. You're going to see here how I deal with that. Mostly what I'm doing here is trying to follow his movement forward, keep him active, and then do what Karen calls passive resistance, which is essentially just this following hand but passively resisting that tension and until he releases. And the moment he releases, then it's a give, 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 give. What was interesting about this day is that there were a couple times in the walk work before we pick up the trot that Contigo was in this sort of state of tension in the pull in the jaw, but then suddenly had a light bulb moment. What if I just let it all go and let go? And he does that a couple times, and just bear with him here, and he will here in a minute. This is one of them here, and he's realizing, oh, this is the better alternative. And so you can see at this point, now I'm just trying to ride him through my seat and keep a quiet rein, but then he comes up again in tension, and I just have to start over. Karen has asked me to make sure that his stride is forward enough in the walk, that he's taking a big enough stride without rushing him. That the biggest no-no that I could have with him in the mounted work is to allow his stride to get too short, his hind leg stride to get too short. So I'm keeping him on a nice big circle, which is essentially what I've been asked to do, with a little bit of leg yielding. Keeping it fairly simple for Contigo. On the circle, the idea is that there's Contigo having a second light bulb moment where he's realizing that it's better to just relax and lower, but then he comes up again. So that's fine, and I just wait for him to have his third light bulb moment, which is there. And I really, really like this nice swingy walk. He's sort of 90% committed to it. I'd like to eventually see him super, super swingy and committed to it much longer than he is. But like the day before this ride, he felt exceptional in the walk work under saddle. He just was completely there. And I was kind of hoping for that in this session, obviously, because in this session it's being videotaped, but not so much luck. So then I feel him release. I really love how he's poking his nose forward and staying active. We've been really working on this. I'd like to continue to coach him to keep lowering and stretching and staying active in that more consistently in that locked in sort of way, but we're just not there yet. I would imagine probably a few more months of this and we'll have more consistency. I am doing a lot of plucking with my heels to pick his rib cage up and roll it over to the outside contact and the outside of the circle, so to speak, or the outside of his body. And so I'm plucking the inside rib cage up and over to help assist him to bring his back up and to connect with the outside rein contact. This is something that I found works for him, and I only just found this out the day before this ride. So, as with all horses and all riders, we have these moments where we discover something that it works, and it really worked yesterday. Today, he's responsive to me picking him up by plucking his rib cage up, but he is not quite as responsive as he was yesterday. I'm trying to reward him each time he gives me that long, low forward stretch with the active hind leg by just staying out of his way and remaining as quiet as possible and just trying to follow him with my seat. But he doesn't stay down there as long as I'd like, and so I have to get back to some passive resistance and helping him get back out in front of me. That's one of Karen's big priorities for me. She wants me to make sure that he's just out in front of me. Contigo is and has always been, unfortunately, due to his way he was trained, but also a little bit Contigo is the type of horse that likes to suck back, I should just say. And so getting him out in front of me after all these years is something that's a challenge for me and it's a challenge for him. So here's a little passive resistance when he wants to come up in the pole and hollow and trot through this rather than bring his back up and stretch long, low, and forward. Those strides got a little short, so my goal is to get them opened up. And I do here. I'm going to check my girth, and then pretty soon here I'll be picking up the trot. So for all of us who have been through this training more than once, and this is my first time, those of us who have been through it more than once know that one of the hardest things to do in this training when trying to accomplish an active stretch is to keep the activity level of the hind leg. And this has definitely been the case with Contigo. To keep him active, to keep him taking those big hind leg strides without rushing him, but to couple that with the long, low, and forward stretch with the nose poking forward. So the first thing with Contigo when I got on his back was that added weight was difficult for him, and I haven't been on his back that long. I've only had his new saddle since April, and even April to August wasn't, all that. I didn't have that much progress with him because of a few challenges. But then now recently, I've been on him probably 2 days a week. And so for the last probably 6-7 weeks, so it's not that long, 2 to 3 days a week at the most. So he's just building the strength to lift his back with me on him, and to carry that during the trot work. So he starts out a little behind the vertical. Remember, my goal here is to keep his hind leg active. Just keep it active and taking big strides. Every time I put the inside leg on, as I've been asked to do by Karen, to put him into the outside rein, he does tend, not every time, but often, he tends to tighten and come up in the pole, so and get a little behind the vertical. So the thing that I've been asked to do is to just continue to send him forward. So that's what you're going to see in this trot work. Eventually, as soon as I get him consistently willing to reach forward and be active and take some deep reaching strides underneath his body with some shoulder forward, shoulder in type characteristics, I'd like to get that forward activity that he's offering. I'd like to ease it up just a little bit, slow him down barely, and convert that forward energy into upward bouncing impulsion, thus to create more engagement with more lift in Contigo's back. So that's the ultimate goal. But for right now, my goal is just to ask him to stay nice and forward and reach with that inside hind leg, reach with both hind legs, and reach under his body with his inside hind leg. I've got some issues with my own body position. I'm leaning forward a little bit. That'll all straighten out. He's a big mover. He's got a lot of movement, and like I said, I haven't been riding him a whole lot, only a few times a week for a short period of time, so I'm just getting used to that right now. From the videotapes that I have submitted to Karen, she does like very much how I'm supporting him to keep his nose out in front of him and not curled behind the vertical, but she also needs me to support him more in softening his poll and his jaw so he can have a better let go and swing through his body more and stretch deeper and find that relaxation and that she wants him to find. She feels that if I just, she says that it's okay to overbend him sometimes in order to get that. So I alternate. Some training days I work the inside rein to supple him and sometimes overbend him a little bit in order to get that deeper let go. And sometimes, like today, today was just I was just asking him to be actively forward and to be out in front of me and to settle into that. Not to resist it, but to settle into being actively forward. And then I was trying to get him to soften his jaw and his poll from the inside leg by picking him up and rolling his rib cage over. So those were my thoughts on this particular day. And here he's settling into it a little bit better than he was just a minute ago. And that's giving me some nice stretches there, but it's not the full release that Karen wants or that we as Art2Riders want. So here he kind of sucks back a little bit, and so I just send him forward. Keep in mind, when he brings his pole up, he sucks back and he hollows. So the key for me has been just to send him forward. And that's what Karen has wanted me to do. Now, if I'm doing it a little too much or not enough here and there, those are things that I'm going to have to fine tune. But Contigo needs to understand that he can be active and be supple while keeping his hind leg active. And he can stretch in that. And I think he just needs to know that he can get there. And this was one of the first rides that I really had where I was keeping him this active. And I'm really trying to support him to relax. And here he is relaxing more. Those moments where he's showing more tension, it's just sort of a tension that he brings on himself because he's a very sensitive horse to any aids, any pressure, any requests to be this active, for example. Every time he does elongate his neck, I just let the reins slip out of my hand. That's a nice stretch right there. Really, 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 really nice stretch. If I could have that the whole time, that's what I would like. So that's what I'm seeking. Not necessarily the whole time, but for the stretchy portion of any of our training sessions. So when I watch my videos after I take them, I look for the highlighted moment, and I would say that definitely was the highlighted moment. That nose was poking out nicely. It was just a really pretty active stretch, and well, I would say it's the best he's ever given me, and that's really nice there too. But so he definitely had some highlights in this, and of course, you know, he gets tense. He has his tense moments like there, but all I'm doing is just sending him forward so that he can work his way through that rather than suck back and get hollow. Pushing that energy out over his back and helping him understand that the best place for him to be is out in front of me, loose, swingy, and relaxed, stretching his neck out and poking his nose forward. He's more than capable of doing it. It's a matter of just helping him trust all of that. I really like the way I'm just keeping him very active, nice and forward, and as Karen would say, just being persistent about what I'm seeking. Most times it's simply just getting the horse to be forward enough in the beginning, and then we translate that forward to more of an uphill balance. But they have to be willing to be forward, and they have to be willing, Contigo has to be willing to accept my inside leg, and he has to be willing to relax and settle into it. If I was to ride him less forward, he would just have a shorter hind leg stride, which is doing him no good. It's this kind of stride that's going to push up, eventually get him to push up through his back and help him with his kissing spine. And that's what Karen had said to me months ago when I first started working with her more closely. But right here, I actually feel him start to curl behind the vertical. And so I realized he was getting tired. So I wanted to end this session as soon as possible. All I wanted to do was see if I could get him to open up that throat latch one more time, and then I was going to quit. And I feel him open up just right there, and then so I asked him to come to a halt, and that was it. And that's it for our session today.